#humans walked away from the council, and the galaxy trembled. Dr. Elizabeth Weber hurried through the corridors of Omega Station, humanity's most classified research facility hidden deep in the Proxima Nebula. Her tablet showed urgent messages from Admiral Mitchell's fleet, now engaged in their second battle with Council forces in just 3 days. The first engagement had been a demonstration. This one was rapidly becoming something much more serious. Dr. Weber called Commander Jackson as she rushed past the military liaison office. "The Admiral is requesting immediate deployment of the Phantom Protocol." Elizabeth stopped in her tracks. The Phantom Protocol was theoretical, untested beyond computer simulations. It was designed as humanity's ultimate weapon, something so devastating that its existence was known only to a handful of people in the entire human government. "How bad is the situation?" she asked. Jackson's expression was grim. 47 Council ships. 6 species. They're using coordinated attacks and some kind of new jamming technology that's interfering with our mirror systems. Admiral Mitchell's fleet is holding, but they're outnumbered 6-1. Elizabeth felt a chill run down her spine. The mirror systems had been considered unbreakable. If the Council had found a way to counter them, humanity's technological advantage might be much smaller than they had thought. "Show me the tactical data," she said, following Jackson into the secure communication room. The holographic display showed Admiral Mitchell's 8 ships surrounded by Council forces in a complex 3-dimensional formation. Red indicators showed damage to 2 human destroyers. Most concerning, the Council ships were successfully targeting human vessels, meaning the mirror technology was definitely compromised. How did they adapt so quickly? Elizabeth wondered aloud. Jackson pulled up additional data. Intelligence suggests the Etherians provided technical assistance. They can perceive across multiple dimensional planes, remember. They probably figured out how mirror works just by watching it in action. Elizabeth cursed under her breath. The Etherians were supposed to be neutral, rarely involving themselves in physical conflicts. If they were actively helping the Council counter human technology, the situation was worse than anyone had realized. "The Admiral is requesting permission to activate Phantom Protocol," Jackson continued. "She says it's either that or retreat, and retreat would show weakness that humanity can't afford right now." Elizabeth stared at the tactical display. The Phantom Protocol represented 15 years of her life's work, building on theoretical research that had been rejected by every Council scientist who had reviewed it. The technology was based on a simple but terrifying principle: if you could manipulate the fundamental forces that held matter together, you could make entire objects simply cease to exist. The implications were staggering. A ship targeted by phantom technology wouldn't be destroyed in any conventional sense. It would simply be removed from reality, as if it had never existed at all. The crew, the hull, the weapons, everything would vanish without a trace. "The President hasn't authorized weapons of that magnitude," Elizabeth said quietly. Jackson's tablet chimed with an incoming priority message. He read it quickly, then looked up with surprise. "She just did. President Chen is authorizing full deployment of all experimental weapons systems." Her exact words are, "show them the price of threatening humanity." Elizabeth closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about the implications of what she was about to unleash. Then, she opened them and headed for the main laboratory. "Activate Phantom Protocol," she ordered. "Full deployment to Admiral Mitchell's fleet." The next few minutes were a blur of activity as Omega Station's most classified systems came online. Dr. Weber's team had spent years preparing for this moment, but she had hoped it would never come. The Phantom technology required massive amounts of energy to function. Omega Station began drawing power from 3 different stellar sources, focusing it through crystalline matrices that had been grown in zero-gravity laboratories. The station's hull vibrated with barely contained forces that most species couldn't even detect. "Transmission ready," announced Dr. Park from his control station. "Admiral Mitchell's fleet will have Phantom capability in 30 seconds. Elizabeth watched the countdown timer, knowing that she was about to change the nature of galactic warfare forever. Once other species saw what Phantom technology could do, every military in the galaxy would be trying to develop similar weapons. The universe was about to become a much more dangerous place. Transmission complete, Dr. Park reported.
Admiral Mitchell acknowledges receipt of Phantom systems.
The holographic display updated to show Admiral Mitchell's fleet, now equipped with weapons that could erase matter from existence. Elizabeth held her breath as she watched the battle unfold.
Admiral Mitchell stared at her tactical display, studying the new weapons systems that had just been transmitted to her fleet.
The Phantom technology was unlike anything she had ever seen, requiring targeting solutions that accounted for quantum probability rather than simple physics. All ships, she announced, you now have access to Phantom systems.
These weapons are to be used only on my direct authorization. Target selection is critical. We want to send a message, not start a galactic war.
The Council fleet had formed a complex attack pattern, with hegemony dreadnoughts providing heavy firepower while Vortac crystal ships used their superior sensors for targeting. Serpentine vessels darted between the larger ships, their weapons designed to exploit any weakness they could find. Admiral, reported Tactical Officer Kim, the Council ships are using some kind of adaptive shielding.
Our regular weapons are only doing minimal damage. Mitchell nodded grimly.
The Council had clearly spent the past 3 days analyzing human technology and developing countermeasures. They were no longer the confused, helpless targets they had been during the first engagement. How are their attacks affecting us? She asked. Mirror systems are at 60% efficiency and falling, Kim reported. Whatever they're using to counter our stealth technology is getting stronger.
Estimate 10 minutes before we lose mirror capability entirely.
Mitchell made her decision. She had hoped to avoid using the Phantom weapons, but the Council wasn't giving her much choice.
Target the lead hegemony dreadnought, she ordered. Single Phantom torpedo. Fire when ready. The UES Defiance shuddered as it launched something that barely qualified as a physical object. The Phantom torpedo was more accurately described as a bubble of altered reality, a region of space where the normal laws of physics had been temporarily rewritten. Chancellor Zoreth watched from his flagship as the strange projectile approached. His sensors couldn't get a proper reading on it.
The object seemed to exist and not exist at the same time, its quantum signature fluctuating in ways that made his tactical officers seasick.
Evasive maneuvers,
Zoreth ordered, but it was too late. The Phantom torpedo touched the edge of his ship's shields, and reality rippled. For a moment, space itself seemed to fold inward.
Then, the entire forward section of the massive dreadnought simply wasn't there anymore. Not destroyed. Not vaporized.
Just gone, as if it had never existed. The remaining portion of the ship tumbled helplessly through space, its crew staring in horror at the impossible sight of their vessel's missing sections. Emergency bulkheads had sealed automatically, but there was no debris, no energy signature, no trace of what had happened to a third of their ship. Across the Council fleet, communication channels erupted in panic and confusion.
Sensors couldn't explain what they had just witnessed. The missing sections of the hegemony ship hadn't been destroyed by any known weapon.
They had simply ceased to be.
This is impossible, transmitted the Vortac fleet commander, his harmonic voice showing harmonies of fear that his species hadn't used in millennia. Matter cannot simply disappear. It violates fundamental physical law. Admiral Mitchell opened a general communication channel to all Council ships. Chancellor Zoreth, you now understand the consequences of threatening humanity. We have weapons that your science cannot comprehend.
Technologies your species cannot counter. Retreat now, or discover what happens when humans decide to stop being diplomatic.
But, instead of retreating, the Council fleet pressed their attack.
46 remaining ships opened fire simultaneously, their weapons converging on Admiral Mitchell's force with devastating effect.
2 human destroyers took critical damage as the mirror systems finally failed completely. The specialized vessels that had been hidden during the previous engagement were revealed as mobile weapon platforms unlike anything in the galactic databases.
All ships, Mitchell ordered, full Phantom deployment.
Show them what happens when they ignore reasonable warnings.
8 human ships unleashed weapons that redefined the concept of destruction. Phantom torpedoes and quantum erasure beams reached out across space, touching Council vessels with forces that unmade reality itself. A Vorthack crystal ship simply vanished, its beautiful harmonic hull ceasing to exist mid-note. 3 serpentine vessels lost their entire propulsion sections, leaving their crews alive but helplessly adrift. A squadron of smaller Council ships disappeared entirely, their existence erased so completely that their allies couldn't remember what had been in their formation positions moments before. The Etherian contingent, those beings of sentient gas who had provided technical assistance to the Council, suddenly began broadcasting on all frequencies. Their message was brief but urgent: retreat. Retreat. These weapons threatened the stability of local spacetime. For beings who could perceive across 17 different dimensional planes, the sight of matter being erased from reality was apparently terrifying. They began withdrawing from the battle immediately, their gossamer ships accelerating away from the combat zone at maximum speed. Dr. Weber watched the battle from Omega Station, her heart racing as she saw her theoretical weapons perform beyond all expectations. The Phantom technology was working perfectly, but its effects were more dramatic than her simulations had predicted. Dr. Weber called Dr. Park from his monitoring station, were detecting quantum instabilities in local space. The Phantom weapons are affecting the fundamental structure of reality in unexpected ways. Elizabeth hurried to his station and studied the readings. The weapons were indeed causing ripples in spacetime, subtle but measurable distortions that could have long-term consequences. "Are we in danger?" she asked. "Not immediately," Dr. Park replied. "But if Admiral Mitchell continues using Phantom technology at this rate, we could see permanent alterations to local physics. Space itself might become unstable." Elizabeth opened a priority channel to the Admiral. "Admiral Mitchell, this is Dr. Weber. You need to cease Phantom weapons deployment immediately. We're detecting dangerous side effects." Admiral Mitchell's response was immediate. "All ships, discontinue Phantom weapons. Switch to conventional systems only." But the damage was already done. Of the 47 ships that had approached human space with hostile intent, only 19 remained operational. The rest had been either erased from existence or damaged beyond repair. Chancellor Zorath found himself in command of a fleet that had been reduced to less than half its original strength in under 10 minutes. His own ship was missing its entire forward section, making it a poor platform for continued combat. "All ships," he transmitted with obvious reluctance, "withdraw to minimum safe distance. Maintain defensive formation but do not engage human vessels." Admiral Mitchell watched the Council ships retreat, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Humanity had proven its military superiority, but at what cost? The weapons they had just used were so powerful that even their creators were worried about side effects. "Admiral," reported Communications Officer Torres, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Word of this engagement is spreading even faster than the first one." Mitchell nodded. "What kind of responses?" "Fear, mostly," Torres replied. "Several species are expressing concern about human weapons capabilities. The Celestials have called for an emergency session of the Galactic Research Council to discuss threats to universal stability. But we're also getting cooperation offers from species that have never contacted us before." The political implications were staggering. By demonstrating weapons that could erase matter from existence, humanity had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Every species would now have to consider the possibility that their enemies might develop similar technology. "Any direct communications from Council leadership?" Torres checked her displays. "Chancellor Zorath is requesting immediate negotiations. The Hegemony High Command wants to establish a direct diplomatic channel. Most interesting, the Etherians are offering to mediate peace talks." Admiral Mitchell considered the offers. Humanity had proven its point decisively. Now they needed to figure out how to live with the consequences of their demonstration. "Send a message to Chancellor Zorath," she decided. "Tell him we're willing to discuss peace terms, but negotiations will take place in neutral space, with representatives from non-Council species as observers."
Make it clear that any future aggression against humanity will result in escalated responses.
As the surviving Council ships limped back toward their home territories, Admiral Mitchell began receiving reports from across human space.
The demonstration of phantom technology had achieved its intended effect. No species in the galaxy would underestimate human military capabilities again.
But Dr. Weber's concerns about spacetime instability were troubling. Humanity had developed weapons so powerful that using them might threaten the structure of reality itself.
It was a sobering thought. The galaxy had wanted to know what would happen if humanity walked away from the Council. Now they had their answer: the universe itself would have to adapt to humanity's independent existence. What none of them knew yet was that the phantom technology was only the beginning. Deep in human research facilities, scientists were working on projects that would make matter erasure look primitive by comparison.
Humanity had spent 15 years being patient and diplomatic. Now they were going to show the galaxy what they could accomplish when they stopped asking for permission. The Council had demanded respect through intimidation. They were about to learn that humanity had redefined the concept of intimidation entirely. The emergency session of the United Earth Council had been going for 14 hours straight, and Admiral James Harrison looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His usually immaculate uniform was wrinkled, his gray hair was sticking up at odd angles, and his famous composure had cracked somewhere around hour 6 when the full implications of Sarah's report had finally sunk in.
"Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said, his voice carrying the careful control of a man trying very hard not to start screaming. "We have one standard year to solve a problem that has defeated the combined military and scientific might of galactic civilization. If we fail, they don't just revoke our membership application. They sterilize our entire planet."
Sarah nodded from her position at the holographic display, where she had been walking the assembled leaders through every detail of the Vega system situation for the past several hours.
"That's correct, Admiral. And you accepted this because
rejecting it would have marked humanity as a coward species," Sarah replied. "The Council respects strength and despises weakness above all else. If we had backed down, we would never have gotten another chance. This was our only shot." President Martinez leaned forward in her chair, her dark eyes reflecting the stress that all of them were feeling. "Sarah, I appreciate the position you were in, but you've essentially signed humanity's death warrant. How are we supposed to fight something that eats energy and converts matter into dark matter? Our most advanced weapons are nuclear missiles and particle beam arrays.
These things treat that kind of firepower as snacks." Dr.
Elena Vasquez, the head of Earth's Xenobiology Research Division, had been unusually quiet during most of the briefing. Now she stood up, moving to the holographic display and manipulating the controls to zoom in on the Devourer construct. "There's something everyone is missing," she said, her accented voice cutting through the growing panic in the room.
"Look at the pattern of consumption. The Devourers didn't just randomly start eating the Vega system.
They began with the outermost planets and are working their way inward. That's not the behavior of a mindless force of nature."
Admiral Harrison rubbed his temples. "So they're intelligent. That makes it worse, not better." "No, Admiral. It makes it interesting."
Dr. Vasquez highlighted different sections of the holographic display as she spoke.
"Intelligence implies purpose. Purpose implies goals. Goals can be understood, predicted, and potentially exploited." The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. "You think we can communicate with them?" asked General Chen, Sarah's father and the head of Earth's combined military forces.
"I think we need to understand what they want before we can figure out how to stop them," Dr. Vasquez replied. "Every species the Council has sent against the Devourers has approached this as a military problem."
"What if it's not?"
Sarah felt a familiar tingling sensation, the same one she had experienced in the Council chamber when faced with what appeared to be an impossible situation. It was the feeling her species got when they were about to do something that any rational being would consider completely insane.
"What are you thinking, Elena?" she asked.
Dr. Vasquez manipulated the display again, this time showing the energy signatures that the Devourers emitted. The Council provided us with sensor data from all their failed attempts to study or destroy the Devourers.
I've been analyzing the patterns for the past 6 hours. Look at this.
The hologram shifted, displaying complex waveforms and energy patterns. To most of the people in the room, it looked like random noise. But Dr. Vasquez highlighted specific sections, and, gradually, a pattern began to emerge.
These energy signatures aren't random.
They're structured.
Organized. They look almost like.
She paused, as if afraid to voice what she was thinking.
Like what? Admiral Harrison demanded. Like language. The silence that followed was so complete that the humming of the room's environmental system seemed unnaturally loud.
You're suggesting, President Martinez said slowly, that the Devourers have been trying to communicate, and every species that has encountered them has interpreted their attempts at conversation as hostile action?
I'm suggesting that it's possible, Dr. Vasquez replied. Think about it from their perspective.
These beings exist in a state that our physics can barely comprehend. They process matter and energy in ways that violate everything we understand about conservation of mass and energy. When they encounter us, maybe they're trying to understand us the same way we're trying to understand them. General Chan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful.
So every time someone has attacked them,
they've defended themselves using the same type of energy that was used against them, Dr. Vasquez finished.
It's not malicious. It's reciprocal.
They're matching the communication method they're being presented with. Admiral Harrison stood up and began pacing, his mind clearly working through the tactical implications.
Even if you're right, how does that help us?
We still don't know how to communicate with beings that exist in a state of matter that our best scientists can barely theorize about. Dr. Vasquez smiled, and, for the first time since Sarah had returned to Earth, someone in the room looked genuinely optimistic. Admiral, you're thinking like a military commander.
You're looking for a way to defeat the enemy. But what if there is no enemy? What if there are just two groups of beings who have been fundamentally misunderstanding each other?
You want to try to talk to them, Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. I want to try to understand them, Dr. Vasquez corrected. But, first, we need to understand ourselves.
Why are humans different from every other species that has tried to solve this problem? What do we have that they don't?
The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah found herself thinking back to her grandmother's words about humans doing impossible things because no one had explained that they were impossible. But there was more to it than that.
We're flexible, she said finally.
Every other species the Council sent was trying to apply their existing knowledge and technology to the problem.
The Draconians tried military force because that's what Draconians do. The Ethereals tried energy manipulation because they are energy beings.
The Mechanoids tried technological solutions because they think like machines.
But humans? General Chan prompted.
Humans try everything, Admiral Harrison said, beginning to understand.
We throw everything we have at a problem until something works.
We don't have the luxury of overwhelming technological superiority, so we have to be creative.
Dr. Vasquez nodded enthusiastically. Exactly.
And creativity is exactly what this situation requires.
We need to think about this problem in ways that no one else has thought about it.
President Martinez leaned forward.
What do you need?
Time, resources, and permission to try some things that are going to sound completely insane, Dr. Vasquez replied. I want to build a communication array unlike anything that has ever been attempted. Not a weapon, not a shield, not a scanner.
A translator. A translator for beings that exist partially outside normal spacetime? Admiral Harrison asked skeptically. A translator for beings that think in ways we've never imagined, Dr. Vasquez corrected.
The Council's data includes energy signatures from every interaction with the Devourers. I think I can build something that will let us actually communicate with them instead of just shooting at them. Sarah felt that familiar sensation again, the one that had driven her ancestors to leave the safety of Africa and spread across an entire planet, to cross dangerous oceans because they were curious about what was on the other side. How long do you need? She asked.
6 months to build the array. Another month to transport it to the Vega system and establish communication protocols. That leaves us 3 months to actually solve the problem once we understand what it is. The timeline was impossibly tight.
They would be working with technologies that humanity had never attempted, trying to communicate with beings that existed in states of matter that their best physicists could barely describe, all while racing against a deadline that would result in the extinction of their species if they failed.
There's another problem, General Chen said quietly.
Even if Dr. Vasquez is right about communication, even if we can talk to these things, we still don't know if they'll be willing to stop consuming the Vega system.
We don't know what they want or why they're doing it. Which is exactly why we need to ask them, Dr. Vasquez replied. But there's something else. Something I haven't mentioned yet. She manipulated the holographic display again, zooming out to show the entire galaxy. Small markers appeared at various points, each one pulsing with a dim red light. I've been analyzing the Council's historical records. The Devourers aren't unique to the Vega system. Similar energy signatures have been detected at 17 different locations throughout galactic history.
Each time, the affected systems were eventually abandoned or destroyed by Council forces when they couldn't find a solution. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. "You're saying this has happened before," Admiral Harrison said. "I'm saying this has happened many times before. And, every single time, the Council's response has been the same. Apply overwhelming force until the problem goes away or becomes someone else's responsibility." Sarah stared at the holographic display, counting the red markers.
17 star systems. Billions of potential lives. Countless civilizations that might have been saved if someone had just tried a different approach.
"The Council isn't testing our worthiness," she said slowly. "They're testing our methods. They want to see if a primitive species might think of something that they've never considered. Or they're hoping we'll fail spectacularly enough to justify their approach," Admiral Harrison added grimly.
"Either way, we're committed now."
President Martinez stood up, her decision made.
"Dr. Vasquez, you have whatever resources you need." "Admiral, I want our best ships ready for long-range deployment." "General Chen, start preparing contingency plans for every scenario you can imagine."
"And, Sarah," she continued, "I want you to start preparing for the possibility that this communication attempt might actually work. If Dr. Vasquez is right, if we can actually talk to these beings, we're going to need someone who understands both human nature and galactic politics to conduct the most important diplomatic negotiation in the history of our species." As the meeting broke up and the various department heads rushed off to begin what might be humanity's final project, Sarah remained in the conference room, staring at the holographic representation of the Vega system. The twisted geometry of the Devourer construct seemed to pulse with its own internal rhythm, like a massive heart beating in the darkness between stars. Dr. Vasquez approached her, carrying a tablet filled with preliminary design schematics for the communication array. "Sarah," she said, "there's one more thing I didn't mention in the meeting. Something I wanted to discuss with you privately."
"What is it?"
"The energy signatures from the Devourers. I've been running pattern analysis on them for hours. There's something familiar about the mathematical structures.
Something that reminds me of something I've seen before." Sarah waited, sensing that Dr. Vasquez was working up to something significant. "They remind me of the songs that humpback whales sing when they're trying to communicate across vast distances in the ocean.
Complex, structured, and filled with meaning that we're only just beginning to understand."
The comparison sent a chill down Sarah's spine.
Whales singing in the deep ocean, trying to reach others of their kind across thousands of miles of dark water. Vast intelligences calling out into the void, hoping for an answer that might never come.
"Elena," she said softly, "what if they're not trying to destroy anything? What if they're just lonely?"
Dr. Vasquez nodded, her eyes reflecting the same mixture of wonder and terror that Sarah felt.
"That's exactly what I'm afraid of.
And if I'm right, if these beings have been wandering the galaxy for who knows how long, consuming star systems not out of malice but out of some need we can't even comprehend, then we're about to attempt something that could change everything. Or destroy us all in the attempt."
"Yes. There's always that possibility." Sarah looked around the empty conference room, thinking about the magnitude of what they were attempting.
In 6 months, humanity would either take its place among the galactic community as a species capable of solving impossible problems, or they would join the long list of civilizations that had underestimated forces beyond their understanding. But, for the first time since returning from the council session, she felt something other than fear. She felt the same sensation that had driven her ancestors to look up at the stars and wonder what was out there, the same curiosity that had made humans the most irrationally persistent species on their planet. They were about to attempt something that had never been tried before. They were going to try to make friends with beings that existed in states of matter that violated the laws of physics. They were going to attempt diplomatic contact with entities that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy considered to be forces of nature. It was completely insane. It was impossibly dangerous. It was exactly the kind of challenge that humans were uniquely qualified to fail at spectacularly.
Sarah Chen began to smile. The UES persistence hung in the darkness at the edge of the Vega system like a metal splinter against the cosmic void. Captain Maria Santos had commanded deep space missions for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of approaching something that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Through the main view screen, she could see the twisted remains of what had once been Vega's fourth planet, now nothing more than a metallic skeleton wrapped in impossible geometry. "Distance to the anomaly?" she asked, though her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. 700,000 kilometers and, closing, Captain, reported Lieutenant Commander Park from the navigation station. "Maintaining approach vector as specified in the mission parameters." Santos nodded, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Behind her, the bridge buzzed with quiet activity as her crew monitored systems that had been pushed far beyond their original design specifications. The Persistence had been humanity's most advanced deep space vessel before Dr. Vasquez's team had spent 4 months rebuilding it into something that was part starship, part research laboratory, and part diplomatic embassy. "Dr. Vasquez, status report on the communication array?" Dr. Elena Vasquez looked up from the specialized console that had been installed where the tactical station used to be. Banks of equipment that seemed to belong more in a physics laboratory than on a starship hummed and pulsed with their own internal rhythms. The entire setup was a masterpiece of human improvisation, combining theoretical physics, experimental technology, and what Admiral Harrison had described as weaponized hope. "Array is functioning within normal parameters," she replied. "Quantum resonance chambers are stable, and the pattern translation matrix is online. We're as ready as we're ever going to be." Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the center of the bridge, watching the main display where the Devourer construct slowly rotated in its alien majesty. Even at this distance, it hurt to look at directly. Human eyes weren't designed to process something that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the universe typically allowed. "Any word from the Council observers?" she asked. "The Draconian battlecruiser maintains position at the system perimeter," reported the communications officer. "They acknowledge our presence but refuse all direct communication. Orders are to observe and report." Sarah wasn't surprised. The Council had made it clear that they expected humanity to fail, probably spectacularly. The observer ships were there to document the failure and ensure that if the Devourers somehow became more dangerous as a result of human interference, appropriate sterilization protocols could be implemented quickly. "Captain Santos," she said, "take us to the communication position." The Persistence moved deeper into the system, past the orbits where planets had once circled their star. The space around them felt wrong somehow, as if the normal rules of physics were more like guidelines in the presence of the Devourer construct. The ship's sensors reported readings that shifted from moment to moment, energy signatures that seemed to exist in patterns that the computer couldn't quite resolve. "Position achieved," reported Lieutenant Commander Park. "We are now within optimal range for Dr. Vasquez's communication attempt." Santos looked back at Sarah, who nodded. This was it. 7 months of preparation, the combined efforts of humanity's best scientists and engineers, and the future of their species all came down to the next few hours. "Dr. Vasquez," Sarah said, "initiate contact protocols." The communication array came to life with a sound unlike anything that had ever been heard on a human starship.
It wasn't quite mechanical, wasn't quite organic, and definitely wasn't entirely natural. The quantum resonance chambers began to emit a harmonic pattern that seemed to reach directly into the fabric of spacetime itself.
Initial pulse transmitted, Dr. Vasquez reported. Pattern based on mathematical constants that should be universal regardless of the observer's frame of reference.
If they're intelligent, they should recognize the intent to communicate. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Devourer construct suddenly blazed with energy patterns that made the ship's sensors scream warnings about radiation levels and gravitational anomalies. The main display flickered as the computer tried to process visual information that existed in spectrums that human technology could barely detect. "They're responding," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice filled with excitement and terror in equal measure. "The energy signatures are shifting, becoming more structured. They're trying to match our communication protocols." Captain Santos gripped her command chair as the ship shuddered around them. Whatever the Devourers were doing, it was affecting spacetime in ways that made normal navigation impossible.
"Shields holding?"
"Shields are adapting," reported the engineering station.
"The energy patterns aren't attacking us.
They're trying to interface with our systems."
Sarah moved to Dr. Vasquez's station, watching as the translation matrix attempted to process the incoming signals.
Patterns of incredible complexity flowed across the screens, mathematical structures that seemed to fold in on themselves in ways that made her head hurt to contemplate.
"Can you understand any of it?" she asked.
"It's like trying to translate a language where each word exists in 17 dimensions, Dr. Vasquez replied.
"But there are patterns. Repetitions. Structure. Give me a few minutes to adjust the translation parameters." The minutes stretched into an hour as Dr. Vasquez worked frantically to decode the alien communication.
The Devourer construct continued to pulse with its impossible patterns, sometimes responding to their transmissions, sometimes initiating new sequences that the human technology could barely process.
"I think I'm getting something," Dr. Vasquez said finally. "The basic mathematical relationships are starting to resolve. They're using concepts that we don't have words for, but I think I can build a rudimentary translation matrix." "What are they saying?" Sarah asked.
Dr. Vasquez's hands moved across her controls, adjusting parameters and refining the translation algorithms. Slowly, words began to appear on her screen. Words that had been translated from mathematical concepts that existed in dimensions that human language had never needed to describe.
"Query, purpose, location, time."
She read slowly.
"They're asking questions.
Basic questions about who we are and why we're here." Sarah felt her heart racing. After all the theories and preparations, after all the speculation about the nature of the Devourers, it was working. They were actually communicating with beings that existed in states of matter that human science could barely comprehend.
"Can you transmit a response?" she asked.
"I think so. But I need to be very careful about how I phrase it. Their language seems to be based on mathematical relationships that describe the fundamental structure of reality."
"One mistranslation could accidentally declare war or claim that we're gods." Sarah nodded.
"Start simple. Tell them we are humans, we come from the third planet of the Sol system, and we wish to understand."
Dr. Vasquez worked for several minutes, translating the simple concepts into mathematical relationships that could be transmitted through the quantum resonance array.
When she finally sent the message, the response from the Devourer construct was immediate and overwhelming. The energy patterns shifted, becoming more complex and more intense. New mathematical structures flowed across the screens, concepts that seemed to exist at the intersection of physics and philosophy.
"They're excited, Dr. Vasquez said, surprise evident in her voice. "The energy patterns are much more animated than before."
"I think they're pleased that we're actually trying to communicate instead of just attacking them."
"What are they saying now?"
Dr. Vasquez worked to translate the incoming signals, her expression growing more amazed with each passing moment.
"They're introducing themselves."
"They call themselves, the word doesn't translate directly, but it's something like gardeners of entropy. They're asking about our nature, our biology, our understanding of mathematics and physics."
Tell them we are a young species, Sarah said. We're curious about them and want to understand why they consume stellar systems. The translation and response took nearly 20 minutes, but when the answer came back, it changed everything. They say they don't consume stellar systems, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice filled with wonder. They say they cultivate them. They're trying to, the translation is rough, but I think they're saying they're trying to encourage the development of intelligence. Sarah stared at the readouts, trying to process what she was hearing. They're gardeners? More than that. They're teachers. They arrive in stellar systems and begin converting matter into dark energy patterns that. I think they're creating some kind of educational environment. They're trying to encourage the development of species that can think beyond normal spacetime limitations. Captain Santos looked up from her command station. Are you saying that everything the Council thinks about the Devourers is wrong? I'm saying that the Council never tried to understand what the Devourers were actually doing, Dr. Vasquez replied. They saw the consumption of matter and assumed it was destructive. But, from the Devourers' perspective, they're converting crude matter into more sophisticated forms of existence. But, what about all the species that were displaced? The civilizations that lost their home worlds? Dr. Vasquez transmitted the question and waited for a response. When it came, the mathematical patterns seemed somehow sadder, less energetic than before. They say that most species flee before the transformation is complete, she translated. They try to explain what they're doing, but few species are capable of understanding their methods. The species that stay and learn to adapt often transcend their original biological limitations. Sarah felt pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place. The energy beings in the Council. The ethereals. Ask them if they remember transforming a species approximately 2,000 years ago in the Rigel system. The question was transmitted, and the response was immediate and enthusiastic. Yes, Dr. Vasquez said. The ethereals were one of their success stories. A carbon-based species that learned to exist as pure energy after their stellar system was transformed. So the Devourers aren't destroying civilizations, Sarah said slowly. They're offering them a chance to evolve beyond physical limitations. But they're so far advanced that most species can't understand what they're offering. And when species attack them instead of trying to communicate, they defend themselves using the same types of energy that are used against them, Dr. Vasquez finished. It's not aggression. It's mimicry. They're trying to match the communication methods they're presented with. Captain Santos shook her head in amazement. So every time the Council sent military forces against them, the Devourers assumed they were trying to learn warfare and responded accordingly, Sarah said. But we came here trying to communicate, so they responded by communicating. Dr. Vasquez was already working on a new transmission, her fingers flying across the quantum resonance controls. I'm asking them about the Vega system specifically. Why here? Why now? The response took several minutes to translate, but when it came through, it explained everything. They say that Vega was selected because it's at the intersection of several major trade routes, Dr. Vasquez read from her screen. They wanted to create a transformation that would be visible to many species, hoping that one of them might be ready to learn. Learn what? How to transcend the limitations of normal matter and energy. How to exist in states that allow for direct manipulation of spacetime. They're offering to teach willing species how to become something more than they currently are. Sarah stared at the main display, where the Devourer construct continued its impossible rotation. What the Council saw as a monstrous threat, she was beginning to understand as something else entirely. It was a school. A university for species ready to graduate from physical existence to something far more sophisticated. Dr. Vasquez, she said, ask them what happens to species that aren't ready for that kind of transformation. The translation took longer this time, and when the response came through, the mathematical patterns seemed tinged with something that might have been regret. They say that species that aren't ready are allowed to leave, Dr. Vasquez translated. The transformation processes are designed to be reversible for the first several cycles. If a species chooses to maintain their current form of existence, the Gardeners will restore the stellar system to its original configuration and move on. But that's never happened, Captain Santos said. According to Council records, every system the Devourers have visited has been permanently altered. Dr. Vasquez transmitted the observation and waited for a response. When it came, the energy patterns seemed somehow frustrated. They say that no species has ever stayed long enough to complete the communication process, she translated. Every species either attacks immediately or flees after the first transformations begin. They've been trying to find a species capable of understanding their intentions for thousands of years. Sarah felt a familiar sensation, the same one that had driven her to accept the trial of worthiness in the council chamber. It was the feeling that humanity was standing at a crossroads, faced with a choice that would determine not just their immediate survival, but their entire future as a species. Dr. Vasquez, she said, asked them if they would be willing to demonstrate their transformation process on a small scale. Something that would allow us to understand what they're offering without committing our entire species to a path we might not be ready for. The question was transmitted, and the response was immediate and enthusiastic. The Devourer construct began to shift, its impossible geometry reconfiguring itself into new patterns. Energy readings spiked across every sensor on the ship as spacetime itself seemed to bend around them. They're creating a demonstration, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice filled with awe. They're going to show us what they mean by transcending physical limitations. The main display flickered and changed, showing not the twisted geometry of the construct, but something else entirely. It was a vision of space that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could normally process, a reality where matter and energy were just different expressions of the same underlying mathematical principles. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Park said, his voice filled with wonder, sensors are detecting something approaching our position. It's not showing up on any conventional scans. The something that appeared on their view screen was impossible to describe in human language. It was a ship, but a ship that existed partially outside normal spacetime, its hull seeming to phase in and out of visible reality. As it approached the Persistence, Sarah could see that its occupants were visible through transparent sections of the hull. They had once been humanoid, but they were something else now. Beings of pure energy contained within geometric patterns that allowed them to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions. They moved through their impossible ship with grace and purpose, clearly adapted to a form of existence that transcended the limitations of normal matter. Those are the ethereals, Dr. Vasquez whispered. Before their transformation. This is what they looked like when they first encountered the Gardeners. The vision continued, showing the transformation process from the perspective of the beings experiencing it. It was not destructive or painful. It was educational. The Gardeners worked with willing volunteers, teaching them how to exist in higher dimensional states, how to manipulate matter and energy directly, how to travel between star systems without the need for traditional spacecraft. They're not destroying species, Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. They're offering them graduation. Graduation to what? Captain Santos asked. To the next level of existence. To a state where the limitations of biology and physics become choices rather than constraints. The demonstration continued for another hour, showing the possibilities and potentials that the Gardeners offered to species ready to learn. But it also showed something else, the loneliness of being so advanced that they had difficulty finding others capable of understanding their intentions. Dr. Vasquez, Sarah said finally, tell them we understand what they're offering. Tell them that humanity appreciates the gift, but we need time to consider whether our species is ready for that kind of transformation. The response came back quickly, filled with mathematical patterns that somehow conveyed both understanding and hope. They say they will wait, Dr. Vasquez translated. They will maintain the demonstration in the Vega system for as long as necessary, allowing species to observe and learn without pressure to commit to transformation. They say that finding a species capable of true communication has been worth the wait. As the Persistence began its journey back to Earth, carrying with it the most important diplomatic discovery in human history, Sarah stood on the bridge watching the Devourer construct grow smaller in the distance. What had started as humanity's greatest challenge had become their greatest opportunity. The Galaxy Council had expected them to fail spectacularly in their attempt to destroy an impossible enemy.
Instead, humanity had succeeded beyond anyone's imagination by making friends with beings that existed beyond the normal boundaries of space and time. Now came the hard part, convincing both humanity and the galactic community that everything they thought they knew about the Devourers was wrong.